we're going to talk about childhood indoctrination.
Good.
And part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings when we get emails or I see postings by atheists who were never indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times they have a lot of difficulty understanding how can a person believe the things that we hear these Christians saying. How can, you know, I had this discussion, this person said this or that to me, and how is it possible that a person could believe this?
Yeah.
And
even recently there were emails of like, you know, I figured out that this God stuff was nonsense when I was like 12. How is it that people make it all the way into their adulthood believing this?
right, and at the same time, I've had people write in and say, you know, I think this sort of people that are raised in this, they're just messed up for life and they're never going to be okay again. And I'll write back and say, well, I was raised in this and Matt was raised in this, and you really can come out of it. Now, whether or not how that impacts you once you've gotten out of it, it's almost impossible to say because you can't ever go back and be a person that wasn't indoctrinated. So you don't really know, I guess, until the day you die, how it actually affected your entire life.
You won't know then either.
Yeah, you wouldn't know, but I mean, you would go through your life and die not knowing, I guess is the way to express that. So I wanted to just sort of go through very superficially what happens with an indoctrination and how that affects people. And of course, people are different genetically, people are different environmentally. You're raised in a different family than someone else is raised in. You have different influences. Somebody else has different teachers, different grandparents. So it's impossible to say that every person, it's like you said, one person might say, I was 9 years old, I opened up the Bible, I started to read it, and I thought, this is garbage, I can't believe this, these are fairy tales. And, you know, someone else at 9 years old is concerned that they're going to go to hell. So you just can't, there is no one size fits all, but there certainly is a theme and a method to indoctrinating children.
Yeah.
So
we indoctrinate them into all kinds of things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes for good reason and good benefit.
Right, absolutely. You indoctrinate people into a lot of different things, but this is specifically to explain how, when a person is not indoctrinated and they're really sitting there and they're sincerely asking, how does a person believe this? This is what I'm hoping I can get them to at least get a grasp of how it's possible that a person could come to believe this. And there was something else that now it escapes me. It was just for a moment. There was a question that had come up in one of the emails, and I was trying to remember what that was. But I can't. If it comes to me later, I'll just go ahead and bring it up. But I want to start out with childhood thinking, and someone had sent us a link to an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and it was called "The Power of Magical Thinking," and it was just a little bit of a summary about a study on how children understand reality from fantasy, and at what age they understand differences between things that are real and things that are not real. And it was one of the things that they used was the garbage man and Santa Claus, because they said most children see evidence of the garbage man, but they don't ever see the garbage man. Just like they see evidence of Santa Claus, but they don't see Santa Claus. So they took children as young as 3, and they found that they understand the concept of what is real and what isn't. And that's very basic. It's not that they demonstrated no confusion. It was that they did demonstrate that they understand the idea. When you ask them if something's real, they know what you're asking. Now, whether or not they can tell if a thing is real or not is a whole other issue.
Right.
Until they're about 7, kids can be easily misled by adults, persuasive words, or by evidence. And when they're saying evidence, they're talking about evidence that would seem to lead to a certain conclusion, but maybe that it's not quite what it seems.
The stockings are full and the toys appear.
Right, right. It sure looks like Santa came last night, and there's definitely evidence for that, but they're not thinking in terms of what else could be causing this. They hold on to their beliefs about some fantastical characters like Santa longer than others, such as monsters and dragons. So children will drop their belief in something like a dragon and understand that it's not real, while they're still believing that Santa Claus is real. Most of the kids in the study were Christians, and the numbers of those who believed in Santa would likely be smaller if there were children of other religious backgrounds in the same sample. And by this, I think they're just saying that most Christians celebrate Christmas, so it's more likely that those children would be exposed to Santa, as opposed to, you wouldn't test the Santa theory on, Muslim-raised children or,
Right.
Jewish children, it certainly wouldn't be the same valid question.
In those cases, you could go with Mr. Hanky, the
Christmas poo. So it says, logically, from what kids observe, it makes sense to think that Santa is real. And this is according to Dr. Woolley. She's a psychologist and professor at the University of Texas. Santa and the trash collector share certain characteristics. Both are people whom kids have heard about but have likely never met before. There's proof for Santa's existence. The gifts that appear on Christmas morning, as well as the garbage man, he makes trash disappear, even though kids don't usually see them in action. A 5-year-old has the cognitive skills to put together the pieces of evidence, but because the pieces are misleading, he or she comes to the wrong conclusion. Younger children may not have the cognitive skills to put the pieces of evidence together, so may in fact be less likely to believe in Santa's existence. And that was what was interesting, is that the 3-year-olds were less likely to say Santa exists than the 5-year-olds. So it seems that the 3-year-olds are believing in something, but it's not really based on evidence. They're not evaluating the evidence. As they get older and they start to understand the evidence, they begin to believe more, even though the evidence is leading them to the wrong conclusion. So at 3 years old, whatever is your method of determining real from unreal is not evidence-based. And then at 5, you begin to weigh evidence a little bit more. Let's see. The 5-year-old has cognitive skills to put the pieces together, but because they may be misleading, they come to the wrong conclusion. And so, let's see, she says, what types of cues and contexts are most convincing to children? Her research team went into preschooler classrooms and told them about a new character that they called the Candy Witch. And this was a woman who comes on Halloween, after Halloween, and she changes out your candy for toys. And they got some of the parents to go along with this and tell the kids, the Candy Witch might come and take your candy and give you a toy instead. And then they switched out the candy for the toys in some of the homes. So all these kids got the story. Some of the kids actually got the switch. And let's see. Nearly 2/3 of the children were convinced that the Candy Witch was real. Those kids who were visited by the witch were more convinced of it. And like Santa Claus, older preschoolers who were on average 5 years old were more convinced than younger preschoolers who averaged 3.5 years old. These results were published in the Journal of Developmental Science in 2004. So from this we see that children are easily manipulated with evidence, and they can be reasonable, but they can still be wrong. So it's not unreasonable to believe something exists when it doesn't, but it can still be wrong if you're basing it on evidence that is not good evidence.
Right.
And that's why verification and not popularity is required to demonstrate the truth value of a claim. So that's another thing that we see a lot in our email, is people who are extremely intent on changing someone's mind, but not necessarily providing adequate evidence to justify that change of mind. So it sometimes seems more important for someone it's almost like, if I can convince you to agree with me, then I'm right. And it's like, no, if I convince you to agree with me, then I just convinced you to agree with me, and if I'm wrong, we're both wrong now.
Right.
So verification is what demonstrates the truth value of your claim, not convincing other people. Simply convincing other people gets them to agree with you whether you're right or not. And if you're wrong, you're just convincing more people to believe something that's wrong.
Right.
Let's see, and then we talked about the 5-year-olds being more influenced by evidence. Currently, she and her students are examining another concept related to reality, when an event is impossible versus improbable. And this was kind of interesting. They gave the kids different scenarios, and the children I don't know if they put them in paper or how they did it, but the children had to separate these little things into, this thing is impossible or this thing is improbable. And they gave the example of one of the 5-year-olds who was given the scenario, Sarah owned a peacock as a pet. And when she was asked whether the scenario was real or not, she said it's not real. And when she was asked to explain how she knew that it wasn't real, she said, because nobody owns a peacock. So she took something that's improbable and she put it in the impossible category. because she just simply was making an assumption that since no one owns a peacock for a pet, that's impossible to own a peacock for a pet. That was her 5-year-old logic. Another scenario was Julia jumped into the air and never came back down. And Mia also correctly identified this as impossible. And when she was asked to explain her reasoning behind why it's impossible to jump into the air and not come down, she said, because nobody wants to live in the clouds where they can't see the sky. So Mia, in one instance, she got it wrong for, I don't want to say it's a wrong reason. I think that there is a certain understanding of saying, I have never seen this, but she doesn't quite get that that doesn't make it impossible.
The same type of mistake in reasoning led to a correct answer in one case and an incorrect answer.
Right. In her other answer, at least though, to say that I've never seen this, I don't believe it because I've never seen it. But to say that it's impossible, that would be going a little bit too far. So, but then the other one, because no one wants to live in the clouds, it's just completely, out there. I mean,
although
it's bizarre.
some of our callers, I think, may want to live in the clouds.
But the point is, she doesn't say it's because gravity is stopping you from staying up. It's like, no, because if you stayed up there, you would never get to see the sky.
I'm wondering if there's something about if there's something in this where you and I talked earlier about knowing something's wrong but not knowing why.
Yes.
In much the same way that, for example, if I did a particular magic trick and tried to tell her that I was psychic, she may not know exactly how it's done, but she knows there's a trick there, even if she never knew that I did tricks. And I'm wondering if this isn't akin to that. I know that people don't live in the clouds. I'm not sure why, so I'm going to make up a reason that makes sense from my point of view.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Because there's no actual evidence in there, other than I don't want to live in the clouds because I wouldn't be able to see the sky. So it's an entirely personal thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Let's see, her responses are typical for her age, says Dr. Woolley. Early results suggest that 5-year-olds don't yet have the ability to distinguish what is impossible from what is unlikely to happen but could technically happen. In future work, Dr. Woolley and her collaborators plan to investigate whether a researcher acknowledging that the situation is, whether a researcher acknowledging that the situation is strange alters the kid's view of whether the scenario is real. And they talk a little bit about imaginary friends, and they say that imaginary friends can be used to help children cope with stress. And I thought that was an interesting point, that feeling like you have someone there with you can help you feel better about a stressful situation. And they said this is a strength of children, their ability to pretend they can fix a problem with their imagination. And I know that a lot of people have contacted us to talk about their feelings of comfort, like, how comfortable they felt either believing in the past that there was someone there to look out for them or feeling like there is somebody there. Right. And I've heard people even say, I couldn't have gotten through this time without God. Yeah. I couldn't have done this without God. And it's just, it's sad that they did do it on their own, but they don't acknowledge their own power. And let's see, this demonstrates, I think the note that I put at the top was that this is how kids think and how they can be misled. And this next section is how kids can be manipulated further as they get older. So you have this idea that children are not thinking really clearly. Obviously, at these ages, their logic is not working properly. Their experience of the world is not, is too insufficient.
Which is what prompts this fallacy of the world is me. We are all prone to this because we live our lives by induction and inference, by and large. And when you come across something that is outside of your realm of experience, if everybody does this, then all of a sudden your experience, you are the world, and your experience is supposed to be typical of the world. So the world is me, underlies things like, the no true Scotsman fallacy, et cetera. And it, I think, may relate to the living in the clouds thing. In her entire experience, having never been presented with the opportunity to live in the clouds, thinking about it, the immediate reaction is, well, I wouldn't want to live up in the clouds, and the world is me, so therefore it becomes improbable, impossible, et cetera.
Right, yeah, or no one owns a peacock, meaning no one I know owns a peacock.
Right.
because in reality there are people that hunt peacocks.
Zoos, for
So
one thing.
there you go. And so anyway,
The peacocks probably
you
don't
have
think
you have at this age between 5 to 9 this sort of confusion about what is real, what is not real, what is possible, what is not possible, and basically not a really good working model of reality. I mean, you're able to discern some basic things, you're able to figure some things out, but your reasoning is not always good. Your evaluation of the evidence is sometimes not what it could be. You're not, questioning as much as you might when you get a little bit older. And so you've got this confused sort of thinking at these younger ages that is developing into, something a little bit more tangible as these kids get near to adolescence. And so then I get into how you can really mess this kid up would be to use emotional manipulation, they have an acronym called FOG, which is fear, obligation, and guilt. And fear, obligation, and guilt are methods that people that are abusive in relationships use to bully and victimize other people in those relationships. So when you see a relationship where someone is being emotionally abused, where they're being taken advantage of, usually someone is manipulating them through fear or through a sense of obligation or a sense of guilt that is not healthy.
Right.
Because all of these things, fear, obligation, and guilt, actually they're given rise to a positive function. Mm-hmm. But you can take that thing that is intended as a positive function to say that it helps us with cohesion and with getting along in society and with protecting us from harm. And you can say, I'm going to do things I'll say, like, if you don't do what I want, then I'm leaving this relationship. If you don't agree to have a child with me, I'm going to leave this relationship. And that would be an abuse of trying to make somebody fear, trying to make somebody feel, bad about something, or say, like, I really want a child, and you know how much that means to me, but you won't have a baby with me, and so, I just don't think that's fair.
It's because you're married to somebody else.
Right, no. This is hypothetical. So
we
anyway,
shouldn't be airing this laundry in public.
Dang it. Anyway, it's just the idea of taking what we know to be healthy emotions that are in people and twisting those things around to try to get somebody to do what we want them to do. And that would be a bad use of those emotions, to try to manipulate other people with them. And then when I came across an essay, and there's nothing particularly authoritative about it. It was just that I thought it was an eloquent explanation of what happens as these children start to get older. And it was literally about religious indoctrination. And what this is Michael David McGee. It was just an essay on conversion, and he says the process of conversion begins with an inner struggle in early adolescence brought on largely by a gradual sexual awakening, inculcating a feeling of guilt in children brought up thinking humanity is given to sin. He describes a sense of incompleteness and imperfection, brooding, depression, introspection, a sense of sin, anxiety about the future, life, and doubts that they have. And I think that even without religious indoctrination, a lot of times kids have these feelings of brooding, confusion. You're hitting an age where you're coming out of childhood, you're getting more responsibilities as an adult, and yet you're restricted as a kid still. You've got this kind of, you want to separate and become your own person. You're starting to actually think like an individual at this point. You're no longer as confused as you were about your reasoning. You're forming independent opinions. And you have all these things thrown at you, and you have to start making decisions about the type of person that you're going to become. And so this is a point where a young person is going to be sort of self-conscious, self-focused. A lot of kids, sit in front of the mirror wishing their nose was different, and they, thinking that, oh my gosh, everyone sees that my hair is looking funny today, or they're at a point of crisis where everything is changing for them. And when everything is changing in your life and everything is changing about you and people are throwing expectations at you and everything is becoming different, change just breeds a bit of insecurity in people at any stage. But when you're a child coming into independence out of a fully dependent existence, that's an extremely big step. And that's a point where these people are starting to feel not so sure of themselves. They're wondering about decisions and things that they're going to make, things that will affect their life. Where am I going to go to college? What am I going to do? Who am I going to date? And at this point, with children who are indoctrinated, they're also dealing with something that is, what do I decide about God? And we're going to talk a little bit about how important, if you haven't been indoctrinated, you're thinking probably, well, why is that an important decision? But we're going to talk about what's given to these children between the ages of, 3 to 9, and why that decision seems to weigh on them and cause a huge amount of stress for them, specifically where a child that's not indoctrinated or does not take to an indoctrination doesn't feel as stressed. Let's see. One of the things I wanted to do, and because I don't like to speak on behalf of Christians, usually when I give a Christian doctrine, I try to quote from Christian sites or use Christian quotes. And so in this case, I felt nothing does this better than children's Bible songs, just children's Sunday school songs. And so I got these lyrics. These are popular children's Bible school songs. And they are songs that you have to remember that the doctrine of Christianity is basically that people are flawed. They are so flawed that they do not deserve God's love, and yet God loves them anyway. And so these children, and the idea is Jesus Christ died as a human sacrifice in order to atone for your worthlessness. And you have no real inherent worth, but God loves you regardless of your lack of worth. So from the song, Jesus Loves Me, it says, Jesus loves me, he who died, heaven's gates to open wide. He will wash away my sin, let this little child come in. And this is literally children that are I remember singing this in preschool. And basically the child is singing about Jesus washing away his sin and Jesus being killed, and how the child is going to be allowed into heaven despite the fact that he is a sinful child. And when I hear people talking about how, we don't undercut children's self-esteem, we don't say anything that would make the child feel, bad about themselves. It's like, well, you're telling the child here, you're making the child sing that he is sinful, and that somebody died as a human sacrifice so that he can get into heaven where he can be with God, obviously, and that this death he's taught was required because of his evilness. And then from the song, the B-I-B-L-E, there's a verse that says, the B-L-O-O-D that Jesus shed for me, cleansed me from sin, I belong to him, the B-L-O-O-D. To me, I don't know, it's just appalling. When I look at it, it's appalling, but I don't know. Does it need explanation? I belong to Jesus because he was, brutally murdered as a human sacrifice by his own father in that plan, and his blood is washing me clean from my evil self. And then this is a song called I'm Inright, Outright, Upright, Downright Happy All the Time, and the line says, since Jesus Christ came in and cleansed my heart from sin. And then from Jesus Loves Little Children, it says, Jesus died for all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus died for all the children in the world. And additionally, this one I wanted to just include because it was appalling, is called Oh Be Careful. And it says, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. There's a Father up above looking down in tender love, like Big Brother. So be careful, little eyes, what you see. The next line, I think, just freaked me out even more. I don't know if freaked out is the word, but just I couldn't believe it when I read it. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. What disturbs me about this is that it's almost like don't listen. Don't listen. I mean, what could you possibly be hearing? How could you stop yourself from hearing? Obviously, if you're within earshot of something, you're going to hear it. So this is about making sure that you don't listen to the wrong things. Be careful, little mouth, what you say. Obviously, yes, I can understand how you wouldn't want your child to go off swearing. Be careful, little hands, what you touch. Be careful, little feet, where you go. But yeah, be careful, little ears, what you hear was a little bit disturbing on a level of warning a child not to listen. And this is the kind of things that you become so used to when you're, at the age of 3 and 5 and 7, you may not fully understand what it is that you're being hit with these things, but you begin to internalize this, and we had talked about it, it becomes normalized. Yeah. So even if you don't understand the idea of human sacrifice, and you don't understand the idea of, brutal murder and somebody being killed as justification for someone else's crimes. And if you don't understand the idea that you're internalizing a concept that there's something inherently wrong with you, if you're taught the doctrine of hell, there's something inherently wrong with you that makes you deserve eternal torture, and you are a sponge, a little sponge soaking this up, and then you hit an age where you hit crisis, and suddenly the question of, am I going to spend eternity in hell, becomes just huge on your mind. And if I can skip real quickly to a few adult songs, I'll just skip some of this stuff because I know we've got callers, but a few adult songs that kind of show what I'm talking about. There's one called Have You Counted the Cost? And it says, have you counted the cost if your soul should be lost, though you gain the whole world for your own? Even now it may be that the line you have crossed, have you counted the cost?
One thing about the kids' songs, though, and this specifically relates to the issue of indoctrination, is I'm sure there are plenty of Christians out there who, current Christians, and former Christians will recognize some of those songs, but current Christians out there who are going, yeah, okay, those are the lyrics. I mean, that's the facts. There's nothing, nefarious about this or evil, or it's not indoctrination. It's just singing. Okay, I'm 40. I remember those songs the second Tracie starts talking about them. Yep, I remember them. I remember most of the lyrics. I don't remember anything else from when I was 4. There's a reason why some of us are ginormous fans and junkies of things like Schoolhouse Rock. It's because singing something, music, learning the tune, is conducive to memory. You remember those things very clearly, very strongly, for ages. I mean, there are songs that I haven't heard probably in 20 years, and if they'd come on, if it was a song that I listened to over and over again, I'd immediately go back to singing along. You could say, well, what's the lyrics to such and such? And I couldn't tell you, but the song, when it starts, prompts the lyrics. It's the way your brains work. And what we're talking about here is wiring little kids' brains with ideas that they don't understand yet, so that when they reach this age in puberty, etc., and probably for the rest of their lives in many cases, but especially in puberty, when their entire life is changing, when their physiology is changing, when they are in a state of crisis, at that point, they're less likely to question, is this real? This is what we talked about today with regard to my story. There are some people who, when they begin questioning in their teens, say, is this whole God thing real? Those people have already escaped indoctrination. They've already escaped the effects of indoctrination to ask those kinds of questions down that path. There's a second set that have not escaped indoctrination, myself included, who, when you have doubts, it's more about not whether or not a God exists, but am I right with God? Am I saved? Am I experiencing the same love and experience that these other people do? And if your answer is no, then what do? As any good Southern Baptist teen will tell you, you rededicate your life to Christ and you start all over again. And you do this, I can't count the number of times I watched people rededicate, and I rededicated, and it's all in this attempt to get something that you know must necessarily be real, that you seem to have the evidence to support, in much the same way that the trash disappears, so there's a garbage man, but presents appearing don't mean that there's a Santa Claus. You appear to have evidence that supports it. You have been stuck by this indoctrination at basically the 7-year level when it comes to this issue of the question of God's existence and our relationship to that entire religious spectrum. You're stuck there. And that's what the indoctrination does, and that's
right.
Why we're
and one thing
it.
I kind of skipped over that I should have brought in was from that essay, conversion removes all the negatives, leaving a sense of relief. And we talked about that too. It's like when you're that age, we get so many letters from young people who say, I was so worried. I mean, I was worried, I prayed so hard, I was so scared I was going to go to hell for like a year when I was 14. I just prayed and prayed and prayed, and I just begged God to help save me and give me some kind of a sign or let me know that this was real or come into my heart or whatever it is that they believe that they need from God. They are begging for this. They're begging for this out of extreme fear that they are going to make a wrong choice and go to hell because they believe that that's a real possibility. So these kids are just, freaking out thinking, I have to make this decision. And we get letters from adults who write to us and say, if you don't reconcile this question, you will live your entire life in fear and doubt about whether or not there really is a God. Now, obviously, Matt and I are not living in fear and doubt about whether or not there is a God. And so the person who writes and says that we're going to experience that can only be speaking from a self perspective. They are basically saying, if I hadn't decided to go ahead and believe in God, I would be in fear and doubt. Because what happens is after a year or 2 years or 3 years of begging and fearing and freaking out and saying, oh my God, am I going to go to hell? Sometimes it's just easier to say, I have to believe this. Yeah. Because if I don't believe this, this is going to be forever. And when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, it's just like when you have your first broken heart. For a lot of people, they just think, oh my God, I'm never going to feel this way again. Yeah. Because you don't have life experience and you don't understand that you really can figure things out and get past this. You can resolve this. And so they're thinking, there's no way I can know if there's a God or not, and so am I going to spend the rest of my life fearing and doubt and worrying about going to hell, or am I going to embrace this and believe it, and then it all goes away, and I can be relieved, and I can believe, and then it's fine. And that's where you get Pascal's wager. It was so much better for me to just believe it than to go on in this state of limbo where I was just freaked out about what was going to happen to me. If you think that the choice is eternal fear and doubt for the rest of your life versus believing it and then all of that goes away and you get that relief, it's really easy to do what it takes to force yourself to accept a thing.